My name is Kevin Navertel, political science professor at Moraine Valley Community College. I'm joined by my friends and colleagues, Mary Faflees Dunkel and Dr. Darren Schreck.
Hey.
The three of us teach at the political science department at Moraine Valley. We've been there for collectively, I think, over 60 years between the three of us. Last week, we decided to have a conversation building off a lot of text messages that we've been exchanging regarding the 2024 election, thoughts about Joe Biden, whether he's going to stay in the race. And we had such a good time, we thought we'd do another video. So here we are, kind of follow up 1 week past our first video, in which we, I think, collectively came to the conclusion that Joe Biden should drop out of running for president. And so I just wanted to check in to see, how you have processed events in the last week, any changes of heart, or what are your current thoughts? Especially, so we've had last Friday, we had the interview that Biden did with George Stephanopoulos on ABC. So current thoughts, Mary?
Sure. So I think my thoughts on this, as I mentioned to you guys last week, had evolved to that Joe Biden either needs to resign either before the convention or just announce that he's not going to run again. And my feelings have been further reaffirmed by this past week, and even with the George Stephanopoulos interview, because unfortunately I don't think he was able to alleviate anybody's fears with that interview. I think it just kind of maybe set people's feelings further into stone, kind of hardened people's feelings further into stone. So a few things that have happened also since then, I think that have also been interesting. First of all, the interview itself, was about 20 minutes, which whatever. I mean, these things that if you took all these things separately and you saw them, little flubs that he would make here and there, or like, I did my goodest or whatever. These would be things that we'd say, okay, you know what? Anyone that has a microscope on them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is going to have a flub. We say, I know I make mistakes all the time. But the problem is the stakes now are so high, and the microscope is I think is on him. The spotlight, right, is so bright on him that any mistakes that he makes now just kind of magnifies the problem. And I think that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So just a couple of things, the Parkinson's doctor was reported by ABC News and other outlets that a Parkinson's neurologist specialist visited the White House, was it 8 times in the last 8 months? And the White House pushed back on it and said that it was, that he has a routine exam every single year, but that that they wouldn't answer some more specific questions about the nature of it, citing security reasons. I think just the biggest thing, other people, like people like James Carville, a long-term Democratic strategist. I just watched an interview with him this morning. I'm not sure if you guys saw it. I think it was on CNN, and he said that he predicts that he's going to be out by the end of the month. But I think no matter what all these things are, that I think it's perception, right? The perception has become the reality, and whether it's fair or not, no matter all these people that keep pushing back on, like I watch, even the View segments of it on YouTube, and some of the politicos on there that know him, that say that they've been at fundraisers with him, that he's fine. But those constant reiterations don't seem to be enough against the wave that is coming at them, even from people like Jon Stewart now, Seth Meyers, Stephen Colbert, the late night hosts, which, you might say, well, those are late night talk shows hosts, so who cares? But those people have weight. I mean, I probably watch those people more than I watch sometimes regular news, because I feel like I get more interesting perspectives than I do from the news. Other than that, I just read it, and otherwise. So yeah, I've got other stuff right now, but I can stop it there. Darren, are you there? Are you having a Joe Biden moment?
No, yeah, I didn't hear anybody afterwards. So, yeah, I didn't watch the interview with Stephanopoulos, and I've only seen clips of it. The issue that I have is that little things that are controlled, like a Stephanopoulos interview, is not going to change the people's perception of how Joe Biden is going to do for the next 4 years. I don't see him doing a a bang up job between now and then if he continues to do these simple interviews. What he needs to do is he needs to go out and campaign and be on the campaign trail. As we mentioned in the last one, throwing up data points and numbers and jobs created and the Dow Jones is doing well. People can look at those numbers and they're not going to believe them. You could say all you want that the economy is doing well on this, and people are going to say, well, it's not doing well on this aspect over here, and I'm not seeing it in my wallet directly. The faint speech of Joe Biden's really is starting to like drive me nuts. That it's not strong. There's no like energy behind it, and it happens with every simple sentence that he's putting forward. And the one thing that I also noticed too is that we watch the campaign trail, and if he's going to be on the campaign trail going to rallies, I think all of us are watching it to see if he's going to slip up. And of course he's going to slip up, just like you said, Mary, that they're going to say things that don't match up or that are kind of like out of whack or whatever. Every candidate does that, but this is a grander, stage at this point, and the consequences of this election are much greater. So the question still remains, because I believe that Joe Biden hasn't gotten any better in 1 week, is that if he is elected, if he is reelected, can he serve out 4 full years? And I still say that he cannot, and that he needs to drop out. Just today, George Clooney said that somebody else has to run. House members are asking for him to run because what they notice is that it's not just going to be him who loses if he does run and loses. It's going to be everybody down ballot, and they're afraid that people are just going to vote straight ticket. They're going to vote Republican all the way down. So I don't think anything has changed in that week since we've met. Kevin, I think you're muted.
Still learning here, right?
Okay.
It's been a minute here. I just agree with everything you both said. I thought that there was a moment that he might have dropped out last week. I thought the interview, I watched it, I was disappointed. And again, it's not trying to put everything onto can he recover in a 15-minute interview. But again, he had his moments and couldn't recall whether he had watched the debate or had some doubt about whether he watched the debate. But it's more about, like, to Darren's point, that he hasn't really done much since the debate. At this point in their presidencies, Barack Obama had 570 press conferences or interviews. Donald Trump had 468. And Biden's had 164 through June 30th anyway. So this is just ahistorical for modern presidents to be so limited. And so that just, to me, speaks volumes that his own team is scared or limiting his access. And when you're down, like we mentioned last week, that he's down in the polls, where historically, 2020, he was up in the polls at this point in the race. He should be going on the offense. And so I feel like the Biden strategy is kind of a prevent defense. They don't want to have any errors. And so they're limiting access to him and not realizing that they need a really aggressive Joe Biden to be out on the campaign trail, giving speeches, doing interviews, and speaking off the cuff without the teleprompter. And they're clearly not confident he could do that. And so to me, that just speaks volumes. I did think that, I read enough earlier in this week, or it seemed to be like the kind of window of replacing Biden had or of him dropping out may have closed. There was meetings in Democratic caucuses, and they seemed to suggest that it was over in terms of the opportunity to have him step down. But then today there was an interview with Nancy Pelosi, and she's very calculated in what she said. I'm trying to get the quote right, but it was something to effective. It is up to the president to decide whether to run, and we encourage him to make that decision. Time is running short. Clearly Biden has been very clear the last several days that he's not dropping out. So that's telling, because I do think Pelosi is one of the handful of individuals that might have the power to, this isn't the Democratic Party of, decades ago, where there was true party bosses who could kind of pick and choose presidential candidates, but she has a lot of power and influence. So I think that it changes kind of by the day. I think yesterday I was thinking he's in it, and now there's still a little bit of a doubt that he'll stay in it, at least in my opinion.
I think there's a lot of doubt still, because I think that one of the things I heard, and I think it was on Pod Save America, but they were talking about it, and they've become quite forcefully, in favor of him removing himself. But they were saying that the problem is that he's not going to give any kind of a hint of it, though, until there's going to be no hint of weakness until basically just comes forward and says I'm out. Because if he does, there's like blood in the water, and it's going to be an immediate feeding frenzy. And so if this is going to happen, it's going to happen like just a sudden thing where there's going to be like, everything's going to be kind of quiet, and then he's just going to come out and make that announcement. So I think there is that. And I think that's a fair point, given kind of the feeding frenzy that's been happening in the media.
And Kevin, like to your point, when people say that they don't know if there's enough time to make a change, I think it's not about being able to, it's about not wanting to try to, because we're so used to, this is the calendar, and we're sticking to the calendar, and the convention is this, and the campaign is this. The campaign basically is 4 years long. I mean, people have, on the Republican side, announced that they were running for president back in 2021. And now we're saying there's not enough time to make a change on the Democratic side. If we had, let's put it this way, that in the UK, they run a campaign for X amount of months. I think it's like a few weeks for the most part.
6 weeks.
How long is it?
About 6 weeks.
It's 6 weeks. So they make a decision in 6 weeks. In less than what, 2 weeks? In France, the people figured out, okay, we're going to have these 2 rounds of voting. If it were based on 1 round, everybody believed that the right wing would have controlled their government. In those 2 weeks, candidates dropped out, formed coalitions, and said, I'm just going to throw my name or throw my candidacy behind someone else because we want to make sure that this one side doesn't win. And therefore, like, everything changed in less than 2 weeks in that country. So those 2 countries show that you can make great strides in a short period of time. And we're looking at it as, and I'm looking at it from a political science point of view, I kind of welcome this idea of changing things at the last minute and see what happens, because, something's got to shift within the 2 political parties. And I think if the Democrats want to win the White House, they have to do that shift right now. They have to embrace this idea of changing things.
Yeah. So a couple of points. I too am very jealous of the election cycles of other countries, especially a couple of the kind of Western democracies that you just mentioned. I think Joe Biden is saying, that we had our primary and the voters have spoken, and to undo the will of the people, through the nomination process is undemocratic, and that he won something like 87% of the vote. And he doesn't want the elites, the party elites or the delegates at the national convention to kind of overturn the will of the people. It's, I think, a very poor argument in some ways, because of course it was these same elites that helped prevent any legitimate Democratic candidate from joining the nomination election to challenge Joe Biden. Right? So he had kind of the luxury of not having to face any real true competition. And of course, those same elites that helped coronate him back in 2020 when he was struggling in Iowa and New Hampshire in the first 2 elections, and helped give him the momentum he needed in South Carolina and thereafter. And then, of course, It was, Barack Obama who helped, that named him as vice president. That I think without him being the vice president through the Obama years, it's very unlikely that Biden would have become the nominee in 2020. So, the elites have been good to him historically. The one concern I have, and I think that James Clyburn and others have brought up this idea of kind of having like a 4 regional primaries, if you will, in a short amount of time period is, and I didn't really think much about this, but Republican states, right, states have the power to set the time, place, and manner of their elections. Would Republican states that are run by a Republican governor and or Republican House and Senate, would they agree to making these last minute changes? Some of these legislatures are not in session, and try and just get the logistics of this off the ground, when it seems pretty evident that the Republicans would love to have Biden stay in the race. They're going to give an assist to help Democrats have this kind of Hail Mary plan towards the end, which I doubt that they would do that. And so I think, to Mary's point, I think it was you who made it, that I agree that there would be really no incentive for Biden to have doubt, like for the next few rounds. Like, of course he would want to make it seem like he was going to stay in the race, even if he did have doubt in his mind and was going to reevaluate in 2 weeks or something like that, because it would create a lot of uncertainty. And, and I don't know strategically if this is actually happening, but, if you were to make some sort of an announcement about the same time the Republican National Convention was being held, you could steal a lot of the attention away from Trump and the Republicans, and who his vice presidential selection is. So I'm not suggesting that that's the kind of calculus that they're making, but it's always a possibility. So let's say Biden does drop out. And I just, we're not actuaries here. We can't predict his health status or what's going to happen. But clearly it seems like the polls in the American public think he's too old. The polls show he's behind Donald Trump, significantly so, in swing states. And he's trailing in swing states where Democratic Senate candidates are leading. So all that spells trouble for the Democrats. One analysis said there was a 65% chance that the Republicans would retain the House, if the election were today. And so all this spells trouble for the Democrats. So let's say Democrats do finally persuade Biden to step out. I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but maybe have a little bit more time to think about it. Any kind of dream team, so to speak, of who Democrats could select to replace Biden?
I'll put my dreams on hold for the moment, because I learned after 2016, it's just the prediction business is too difficult. But what I will say, because I think there's just so many things that could change between now and November. But I think that there are still things that are happening in the works that are moving without us knowing. I don't think that his team is that oblivious. I don't think they're that out of it. I do think that these conversations are happening. So one of the things I heard, I think I told both of you on a podcast with Anthony Scaramucci, no less, and Katty Kay from the BBC. And it was really interesting that he was speaking to people at a fundraiser very recently, in which he also was alarmed at Biden's appearance, and that basically the word on the street is that he is going to be out, but that basically the idea is that he's going to resign before the convention, so that Kamala Harris can go into the convention as president, and they already have the delegates at hand, already have his money in hand, and just basically kind of so that the party can unify, and that there is not this sort of uproar. I would, like I said, I have my candidates. You guys know how the love I have in my heart for Mayor Pete. I want to see Pete Buttigieg one day become president, because I think he'd be phenomenal. But at this point in time, I think that we need to do what is the most pragmatic. And I think that in terms of alienating voters and certain constituencies, one of the most alarming things I saw just today, actually, and I'll make this very quick so you guys can jump in. On the Daily Show, there was a little segment where it was, and I forgot the name of the fake correspondent, is one of the comedians on the Daily Show, but where he interviewed 6 Black voters and basically asked them, who are you voting for? And 3 of them were voting for Trump, and 3 of them were voting for Biden. And they went through their reasons for why. And he was playing clips from Trump saying outrageous things about, the whole Black people doing jobs, particular jobs, which was a totally insulting thing. And he gave him things, which, thumbs up or basically middle finger. This is a bit, right? But no matter what was being said, the people who were supporting Trump were continuing to support him because they said, well, Biden says things too. And that to me was more alarming than I think anything else in terms of so if we're losing a good chunk of the Black vote, if that is indeed true and it's a harbinger of what's to come, I think a good way to support that cement that support that's been there, that's been a bulwark of the Democratic Party for so long, is to have Kamala Harris be at the head of the ticket. And I'm not saying that anyone automatically votes some way just for identity politics, but I think it would be insulting to a certain segment of the Democratic Party were she not the nominee. I'm not saying she's my first choice, but I think that that's what should happen.
All right, I will. I'll make a prediction then. How about that? I'll look in the crystal ball. My dream ticket would be Harris and Shapiro from Pennsylvania. I think Shapiro is a very pragmatic Democrat. As mentioned last time, being able to get the ball rolling to fix I-95 when it shut down, which was a big deal. I mean, for people out here, that would be like, I-55 or I-94 breaking down and being able to be fixed in a few weeks to get the economy going on that eastern seaboard as it will. So I would say a Harris Shapiro ticket would make sense. Mary, I like that idea. And I'm going to say I like the idea of them announcing things during the Republican National Convention or at their own convention, because it kind of plays into this idea that, politics has become like entertainment and it's all about ratings. And the former president keeps talking about ratings and, the Q numbers of people and all this other stuff. And I think that would really play into it. And right now, I think if Biden stayed in the race, I came up with numbers where I think he would lose Pennsylvania. And I also think he has a possibility of losing New Hampshire. And he'll barely win Michigan, and he would barely win Wisconsin. And I've always thought that he would lose Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. So if you look at those numbers, with him losing Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, the Republicans would have 291 and Democrats would have 247. If it changed the other way, the numbers would be 270 for the Democrats and 268 for the Republicans. So I don't think the Biden people are stupid either. I think they could see these numbers and the handwriting on the wall and the down ballot races and how they're going to be affected by things. I think they would be foolish to allow Biden to stay at the top of the ticket. I really do.
Well, I think you're right in terms of they would be foolish to keep Biden at the top of the ticket, but Biden is in the driver's seat on that, and I think in some ways I think he might, and then this is just guessing, but he might be, well, why is the attention on me and not this person who is a felon or this person who tried to overturn the election or this person who, the list goes on of the different things that Trump has said or done that, and granted, he's 3 years younger than Biden and has had plenty of his own moments of forgetting and not completing sentences or saying things that doesn't make sense. So I think he still has that kind of, well, what about the other person? And I beat this person and democracy's on the line. I think, though, to the point I disagree, some of the numbers are even worse. I don't think he has a chance in New Hampshire, like you said, Arizona or Georgia, and, at this point, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I mean, there's even numbers showing that he's within 1% or 2% in New York, or that it's definitely below 10%. I mean, it's no longer, New York State is no longer just a given for the Democrats. And I think that connects to some of the things that Mary was saying earlier about, Black voters, Latino voters, young voters. Not only are Democrats are still going to win the majority of these voters, but they're not getting the margins that they would need, and they're not going to get the turnout. You need huge turnout of these demographics that have been the historic bedrock of the Democratic Party to show up. The one point I guess I don't just call it disagreement for maybe controversy's sake, Mary, is that you know, Kamala Harris, I think it is true that if she were to be passed over, I do think that that could create, animosity in groups in the Democratic Party for sure, because she is the sitting vice president. That being said, she has been close to Joe Biden and probably knows better than anybody how maybe he's declined in the last several months or year, and is very associated with him, right, by being vice president. The other part is just her background as prosecutor back in California. How she's actually viewed in the African American community, I think, differs. And I think there's certainly, and we tried to say this last time, that there's no monolithic group where, based on race, ethnicity, gender, any of these traits, that you're somehow destined to vote only for one party. But I think that I've heard from many individuals in the Black community who have expressed a lot of concern about Kamala Harris. That being, I'm not trying to suggest she doesn't have a majority of support, but I do think there's some weaknesses there. All to say, my dream ticket, and I was just going to share the screen for a minute and see if this comes through. So this was a poll. July 2nd. So this was, I believe, July 2nd, Ipsos poll. And so they have several different candidates in here. And I tried to make this a little bit bigger, but hopefully you can see it on the screen. What stands out to me, I mean, there's so many different things that stand out. I know last time, Darren and I think we're talking about the number of people who just were unsure or didn't know about some of these people like Pritzker and others, so there's a lot of ways that these people could improve their name recognition. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But, Michelle Obama, I think this is a really important story. I think anybody who follows this knows that she has said multiple times that she wouldn't run. But for all these Democrats who are saying democracy is on the line and that the United States wouldn't be the same with the second Trump administration because of Project 2025 and all the Trump saying he's going to be dictator for a day or what have you, to see that there is a person out there who is ahead of Trump by 11%, at least in this one poll, but there's been many polls like this, has to be very enticing. And for her to continue to say that she wouldn't run, considering, Trump was the person who called into question Barack Obama's, whether he was born in the United States, these birther claims where he's trying to say that he was born in Kenya and that nobody had his birth certificate. So I think she knows firsthand how awful it is to be in this highest office. But I think she also knows the character of Donald Trump. And it just, there's that, if we're going to talk about a dream ticket, Michelle Obama would definitely be at the top of that ticket for me. And then potentially one of these governors of a swing state. I think we talked about it before, Gretchen Whitmer, and I think Josh Shapiro, like Darren had mentioned. So I just talked for a really long time, so I'll stop there and turn it back over to my colleagues. Thoughts that you might have.
No, you guys are, you're good. You're good, Kevin. I was gonna say, I think a Harris Shapiro ticket, I think, would be great because that is a swing state, and the idea of that in that quick report that these 6 states that have moved towards Trump that is just incredibly alarming. Did either of you catch the fact that Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado came out publicly and said that Joe Biden should not be running, and that he had a conversation with Sherrod Brown of Ohio, and I forget the other senator who was there. Do you know, Kevin? I can't remember the other senator who was there. But that basically that he was basically very open and said that this is, you guys, it was said that I said this. And so, yes, I did say this, which is kind of his candor it was interesting. But I think that, again, this momentum, I think, is starting to move this way. I think that more and more people are starting to say it. And I know it seems like, he's stonewalling, but I just think that that's not going to hold up. The point that one of you made about, because this kind of gets into your fourth question, Kevin, and I know we're kind of getting shorter on time, but in terms of Trump and why he seems to always like evade that criticism and that like that constant that critique. Because people, that was something that I've heard in multiple circles. On the one hand, you could argue that yes, he evades it, but on the other hand, he doesn't, I guess, depending on what you watch. I mean, at least on things like ABC or on like some of the mainstream kind of more news, there's constant critique of Trump in those circles. And I think part of the problem is there's such a constant critique of him that it's become, there's just this fatigue. Nobody really pays attention to it anymore. We're almost like those of us, I think the three of us and people like us will constantly still read about it, and he still keeps descending to new lows, right? But most people don't. We're numb to it now. We're used to it now, and people have almost kind of checked out about it. And when you describe things like Joe Biden just said the other day about well, Google Project 2025 and read up on that. Yeah, well, that's what that should have been said for a while now. And again, I know it's so easy to be Monday morning quarterback on a campaign, and we're not Monday morning yet, but you get my point. But that is just that when you read the stuff that's in that report, it is so petrifying. That should be just blasted constantly. And I think the media is starting to pay more attention to it now, but they have not been. But that's because, think about it, CNN used to broadcast Trump's rallies when it was an empty auditorium because it gave him ratings. I think part of it is that he continues to give ratings. I think he continues to draw people. So I think that's just part of it. The people look at it as almost like a joke. And the average voter who does not have that same level of efficacy doesn't seem to really grasp the threat. I see that in my own family, with some members of my own family, that they just think, oh, they're all kind of the same. Like, no, they're not the same. They're not the same. So I think that's part, I think it's just this overall fatigue and just this tiredness. People are just tired of him and just kind of dismiss it. And there are other reasons too, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I know of someone who maybe last year said, what are we going to do to get Trump out of here? And at the same time, I knew in the back of my mind that the person voted for Trump in the first place and is probably going to vote for Trump again. So that's not going to change anything. And Mary, you bringing up the skit that was done, that no matter how much, whatever Trump said, there were African American voters who were still going to vote for him. And that means like there are going to be other voters who are going to listen to what Trump says and they're going to vote for him no matter what he says. I mean, I think even at the debate, he claimed that there was a dog that could be used to, stop what was happening at the border. And the way he said it was, they have a dog. And I'm thinking to myself, now it's the energy level that he shows as opposed to what Biden shows. And people say, well, look at that. He may be 3 years younger and I don't know what he's saying, but look at how he's saying it. And this one, I'm not really paying attention to what he's saying because he's just an old fool. And that's what's coming about here. I think it has a lot to do with just the perspective that the voters have about the energy levels of both candidates. But if you listen to both of them, one has substance and the other has, I don't know what that is. And going back to something even before that, I just looked at a poll that said that African American voters might poll as high as 21% for Donald Trump if they voted that way on election day. Typically, the number for a Democrat to win at the national level is usually in terms of Republican support from African American voters would be about 8 or 9. Once you get past that 10 or 11%, then it becomes kind of sketchy. So 21% would really put, Trump in the driver's seat. And so I'll leave it at such that I think it has a lot to do, going back to the original point of the question, I think it has a lot to do with the energy level, and people are just willing to dismiss whatever Trump is saying because at least he's showing that he has energy.
Yeah, I just wanted to there's so much to talk about with this. I think the media is always a punching bag. They get a lot of criticism and rightfully so in many different cases. But I part of me was remembering last week tonight with John Oliver. He used to have a bit, and it's been years, maybe early on in the Trump presidency, maybe even before the Trump presidency, where he started doing this, and he'd be like, all right, we got him. He just said this, or he just did this. That's it. It's over. And, he'd have this big celebration and balloons and confetti. And It's funny because obviously you never have Trump. It doesn't matter, the Access Hollywood tape. He's a convicted felon. I don't want to go through this because I think the people know what I'm referring to, but yet, none of it has mattered in many ways to voters. And when I say none of it matters in terms, it hasn't really taken away his popularity, his support. And it does matter, I think, in some ways, because I think in some ways the media, when they do cover him, it gives him attention, and they see him as the victim, and they see that it's the enemy of the people is the media and their fake news, and they're the failing New York Times. And so I think I mentioned this last time though, but that somehow if some opinion piece, some editorial board issues, another article about Donald Trump, that somehow is going to get him, and it's going to change everything. And finally, end the reign of Donald Trump and his hold on the Republican Party and his ability to potentially win this reelection by a landslide. I don't know. It's like Donald Trump had once said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't matter. At least I think he said something to that extent. Yeah, I think you get the idea here, is that I just don't know that there is some fact checking, that there is some critical news story that's ultimately going to move the needle. Because I think largely many of his supporters view them as he is the victim, and it just builds his support. So yeah, we are running out of time here. We're trying to keep this shorter, so it's a little bit easier for people to consume. So just any final comments anybody would like to make that we didn't quite get to?
One thing that I was going to say, the failed Democratic, according to Politico, the failed Democratic presidential candidate, Representative Dean Phillips, broke his silence on President Joe Biden's electability on Tuesday. And he said, if this has been vindication has never been so unfulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what a lot of people are thinking right now.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mary. Was there anything that you? Okay.
No, I was just going to pivot off of what you both said, but really quickly about the energy point that Darren mentioned. I think that's a really good point. That I think that Trump, no matter what, though, has continued to stay kind of like at a stasis, right? Like whether he goes up in the polls a little bit here and there, by and large, people already know what they have of him. And there's so many people who his unfavorable rating still remains so extremely high. I think if you got any candidate at this point that was not Trump and that was not Biden, who was younger, and even if it was Kamala Harris, I still maintain there is a path for her, despite any other kind of unfavorable kind of attachments that she may have. And she's gets out there and starts prosecuting that case against him, and she's energetic and she brings that passion. I think it's going to mobilize and galvanize a bunch of people on the Republican side that don't want him, and on the Democratic side who've been kind of staying out.
I 100% agree. I think that there's so much apathy because of this, the rematch, if you will, of the same names, people who have been president. And so there could be a huge groundswell of a renewed interest in politics and elections and government if we did have new candidates, even one new candidate. I just will end by saying one of the things I want to do differently is add, sometimes we reference articles or videos, and I know, Mary, you referenced a skit from The Daily Show, so I'm going to find the link to that. And although I didn't reference it before, I want to add a couple skits or a couple bits that I hope people take the time to watch. There was a Daily Show from 5 months ago. I think it was the first one when Jon Stewart returned to his weekly episodes. He's on Mondays on the Daily Show, and it's his very first episode, and he did a pretty critical look at Biden and his memory, his speaking ability, and if democracy is really on the line, if Democrats are really being responsible by having him as a nominee, right? And that was February. And then going back to October of 2022, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live that I'm also going to add that basically had this kind of horror show of, all the different possible Democratic nominees and how scary they were. Again, these are both satire shows, and how they ultimately concluded that after considering Kamala and you know, Hillary Clinton and all the different options that, oh, Joe Biden, here we are again. But they were very concerned about his age then. So just that there's been some funny looks at this topic for months or years. And so maybe we shouldn't be as surprised that this is the place that we're at. So thanks to the viewers who watched. And we enjoy these kind of weekly sessions of kind of digesting current events. And so we hope to have some in the future. Take care. Thank you.